Hopefully tonight, I'm able to give you a little bit of insight into how the financial aid process works, give you some tips, give you a strategy that you as your family can use going forward to help finance the cost of higher education. As I go along, there may be some times where I seem to go too fast or it raises a question. If it's a general question, feel free and we'll try to resolve it right then. But at the end, there'll be a time for some general questions, and then if you have some personal family situations you'd rather not discuss, we can go through them at that time as well. So let's get started. Okay, things we want to cover tonight. All right, what is the actual cost of college? And what's the difference between what it's listed as a sticker price and the net price of college? And then what is financial aid? Where does it come from and what does it consist of? And then how do you apply? When do you apply? And then what other strategies can you use and what other tools are out there available for you to help you make these decisions? Okay, so before I start, I'd like to kind of make sure that everybody understands that college does cost money. And you're going to pay in a combination of three ways. All right, some families are fortunate enough, they might have saved up a significant amount of money that they can use beforehand. Sometimes the student has amassed some college credits while they're in high school. Great, maybe they can take a shorter loads when they get through. Right? During school, all right, there are grants, there are scholarships, there are different programs available to help bring down that actual sticker price. And then, for a large amount of the population, they also have to pay afterwards in the form of student loans or parent loans or some other financial arrangement they might have made. But usually it's a combination of all three things. So if you're short on the savings, there's still opportunity with the other two ways, all right? Or if you've got a lot of savings, maybe hopefully you reduce the amount that you borrow as you go along. All right? And then I ask every family, before they sit down and talk to schools, before they actually go through, sit down and give yourself as a family, make sure the student's involved, as well as the parents, and give yourself a realistic budget of what you have available. And if there are adjustments that can be made to that budget, all right, are there things that you can cut costs on to help get a little bit of more money now or as college progresses along? Just kind of develop your own strategy and your own budget so that you're better prepared when it comes time to make the decisions of which college you might choose. All right, so the sticker price of college. And the prices vary depending on the type of school, where it is, and what type of college it is. Typically, private colleges are more expensive up front, right? But realize they also have more of their own financial aid that can help reduce that cost. All right, so a private college may cost twice as much as a public college, which might cost twice as much as a community college. All right, but this is just what the price is beforehand. Financial aid comes in play to try to level that playing field and make it possible that finances aren't the reason to not choose a school. All right, and then the other thing we've got to get familiar with, and you will become familiar with this, in financial aid, two things. We use a lot of formulas and we use a lot of acronyms. But the primary one is when we go through the process and we review your applications, we're looking at our cost of attendance, which is going to vary from that prior screen, private schools costs, public, whatever our cost is at our particular school. We subtract what your estimated family contribution is, and that family contribution isn't what you say or what I say, it's what's set as a result of your financial aid application. The government has a formula as well, all right? And the remaining amount is your financial need. So if you compare a private school to a public school, just by doing the initial financial aid application, your initial cost may vary. But that financial contribution is expected to help get that figure for you. Okay? But hopefully there's a net price involved for the college, that you don't actually have to pay the sticker price. And you can find the net price of schools for your particular family situation by visiting the websites of the schools that the student's considering. Every college has on their website something called a net cost calculator or a net price calculator. And what it usually does is asks you a few questions about family size, income, and gives you a general idea of what you may pay for that school. Typically, if you go through these on the college websites, the private schools might start to ask some additional questions like GPA or class rank or SAT or ACT scores. And the reason they do that is they may have some merit aid that helps also in the process. All right. So what are the sources of financial aid? Where does it come from? Basically, the federal government is a big supplier of financial aid in the form of grants and loans mainly. All right. Whenever time a student takes a student loan, it is a federally guaranteed student loan. New York State has some programs. Their main grant program is called a TAP grant. But they also have some specialized programs for high achieving students or students going into particular fields. And sometimes the combination of those might get them an additional award from New York State. The college you attend typically can offer scholarships. And again, as I said at the beginning, private schools usually have more opportunity in scholarship than public schools. But it doesn't mean that that's all there is. Public schools do have some. And then there's outside sources for scholarships. All right. And then the types of financial aid boil down to 4 different types. Grants, which are need-based. When you go through the financial aid process, there'll be questions on your income and family size. And that can determine how much grant money you can receive based on need. If you receive grant money, great, because you never have to pay that back. All right? Scholarships could be based on merit or need. All right? And that merit factor doesn't necessarily have to just be grades or scores. It could be based on some sort of talent or along those lines. Scholarships are also great because they never have to be paid back as well. And then the last 2 types of financial aid are what we call self-help aid, student loans, okay, which again, if you go through the federal loan process, they don't have to be paid back while the student's in school. They don't have to start repayment until afterward. And then there's another program called work study or other work opportunities like an internship that could be paid. But work study is basically a part-time job for a student while they're at college to help with some of the incidental expenses related to school. Okay, looking at grants. Okay, the federal and state government are the major supplier of these need-based grants. The federal government's main grant is called a federal Pell Grant. And when you do your financial aid application, and I'll go through the process you're going to go through in a little while, okay, the result gives you that expected family contribution. The lower that family contribution, the more likelihood you would qualify for that federal Pell Grant. If you go through that financial aid application and the government indicates that your expected family contribution is 0, you could qualify for the full Pell Grant amount, which this school year is $5,815. It can change year to year because it's congressionally authorized, but this year this is the amount, and it's gone up a little bit in each of the last couple years. All right. The federal government also has an SEOG grant, a supplemental grant, that different schools can give to their higher need students. And for students going into an education program, they could also possibly get what's called a TEACH grant if they're going into a high demand teaching field. New York State mentioned TAP as their main form of grant money and strictly based on need and full-time attendance at a New York State school. Their formula is a little bit simpler, and they look at, based on your tax return, what your net taxable income was. And if it was below $80,800, you would qualify for a TAP grant. All right? And that amount raises, the TAP amount raises as your income is lower and they go through the process. We mentioned a couple other programs, AIMS and STEM, which are for high achieving students. Okay? Going into STEM is going into a STEM related field, science, technology, engineering, or math. All right, but again, there may be a qualification if you're a top 10% student in your class going to a SUNY school in New York State, you might qualify for that. All right, and scholarships could come from a variety of sources. All right, as you're looking at colleges and you're talking with their admissions or going on a visit, Usually you'll find out what their scholarship application process is. Some schools require an application, some don't. Some are awarded strictly based on the results of your admissions app and the proof of your GPA or class rank. All right? Some have a separate application for certain types of scholarships. The high school, the College and Career Center can offer and let you know what types of scholarships are available for graduates of Rush-Henrietta. And maybe they're tied to a particular school or general or in the area. All right? The different civics groups or business organizations sometimes offer scholarships. Places of employment, whether it's the student or the parent, perhaps they offer scholarships. And there are some free internet searches to go for scholarships. All right? The thing about scholarships is just because you meet the qualifications in a lot of cases doesn't automatically mean you're going to receive that scholarship. Sometimes there's a limited pool of scholarship money, and depending on the number of applications, that scholarship group might rank their applicants or have a committee that looks at them. We do know that if you don't apply, you can't be considered, but if you do apply, it doesn't automatically grant you a scholarship. But again, there's some industrious students out there that have looked really hard and found some additional free money to go to college. All right, the next type of aid, we talked about student loans. And if you have to borrow for college, the first place to look, the best place to look initially, is through the federal direct student loan process. Okay? The reason being is if you qualify for a need-based, a subsidized federal student loan, again, based on that formula, cost of attendance minus family contribution, remaining need, if you had a need pool that allowed student loan dollars, it would be subsidized, meaning the government would pay for the interest while the student's in school. Interest wouldn't start accruing until they go into repayment. However, the government sets limits on the amount of subsidized loan money even need-based families can get each year. The subsidized limit for a freshman with need-based is $3,500. Every freshman could also qualify for unsubsidized student loan money, which does accrue interest while the student's in school. The interest rate is the same as the subsidized, but it's just interest starts accruing right away. The combination of the two loans as a freshman can be no more than $5,500. If you had need through the formula, you could get $3,500 in subsidized and $2,000 in unsubsidized. If your need didn't quite show, your family contribution was higher, you could get up to $5,500 in an unsubsidized loan. Again, the combined two can't exceed $5,500. Beyond that, there's also a federal loan program for parents, where the parent would borrow in their own name. The interest rate is slightly higher than the student, and interest does accrue right away. You could take a parent loan up for all your remaining need, or if you have a high EFC, you could take it for the full cost of attendance potentially. Any loan in a parent name does involve a credit check. All right, student loans don't, but the parent loans do. So as you go through the process and you're weighing your options, grants first, scholarships, if you then consider loans, usually student loans first, and then possibly in some cases a parent loan as well. All right, and then work opportunities. All right, sometimes when the financial aid office sends you your financial aid award information, it'll include the opportunity for that work-study job. And those jobs are typically paid at minimum wage based on hours worked. And it might be working in the admissions office giving college tours. It might be working in the athletic facility taking tickets. It might be working in the cafeteria. All right? But typically, while the students at college, they're in class for about 15 to 18 hours a week. So there's opportunity in between classes or on mornings or afternoons when they don't have classes to maybe work part-time, gain some valuable work experience, and gain some spending money to help towards their incidental costs towards college. All right. How do you apply for financial aid? Okay, we went through the types and the sources, but how do you actually do it? All right, so the first step, because you're going to fill out a federal financial aid form, is you need to get what's called a federal student aid ID. The parent needs one, and the student needs one. and they have a government website where you will set up these IDs. These IDs act as your signature through the entire financial aid process. Every year you apply. If you take loans, it's how you sign a promissory note. And when you go into repayment, you would check your balances with this. All right, so the student creates one with the username and password in their name, and the parent creates one. This is fairly new. It's only been out a couple years from the government. They used to have PIN numbers, but they wanted to make it more secure. So they created this website and the username password idea. What gets confusing in the financial aid process is even though the student's going to the school, we all know the parents are doing the financial aid stuff. It's important the student gets involved as well. And here's the first example. If the parent goes in and tries to create their child's user ID, they might use their own email address. And then they go and create their own ID, and if they use that same email address, it'll reject. So the student needs a unique email address, unique username, and unique password that are all different from the one the parent creates. Both parents don't necessarily need an FSA user ID, but at least one does. The financial aid process requires at least one parent to sign the form, and again, signing it with the user ID is the way to do it because it's the quickest way and the most secure way. You can create these user IDs at any time. You don't have to wait till you're actually doing the application. But when you do, make sure you're going to be able to remember the email address you used, the username, and the password. When you get to the website, it's going to ask you to log in and create this, okay? And again, make sure the student and parent are doing it separately and that you remember what you use to do it. All right, once you have your user IDs, and after October 1st of the student's senior year, you can actually go in and do the federal financial aid form. You don't have to go in on October 1st and do it, but that's when they make it available. You should make sure you do it by whatever your school's published deadlines are. All right, but once you've got the user ID, you're able to go in, and it's at a government website, FAFSA.gov or FAFSA.ed.gov, both work. The FAFSA form, it stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. You need to do this for any college you're considering, but you only need to do it once because you can list multiple colleges on the application. It's a free site, okay? And anywhere in financial aid, as you're going through the process, financial aid applications are designed to be free. So this one, if you go to a FAFSA.com site, they might try to charge you money for doing what can be done for free. So make sure you're on the government website for the FAFSA and doing FAFSA.ed.gov. Same goes back to the student aid ID. It's FSAID.ed.gov. Make sure you're on the free site. All right? And when you're going to do this form, it's going to ask some questions about family size, income for the parent, income for the student, assets for the parent, assets for the student, and that's what the government puts through a formula to determine your family contribution. All right, the front of the page looks like this. If you've got more than one student going to college, does the parent need to create unique IDs for each student? For themselves, for the parent, for each student's application? And the answer is no. Your parent ID, the FSA user ID you create for the parent, is yours no matter how many children are in school. However, there has to be a FAFSA done for each student. So the government considers the FAFSA as the free application for federal student aid belong to the student. So if you have multiple in school, student one and you will go in and do their FAFSA. And student one's FSA ID will be on there, and parent one's FSA ID will be on there. Student two has to go in and do a FAFSA. Student two's FSA ID will be in there, but parent one's FSA ID will be the same on that application. All right, and you can see when you go in to enter the FAFSA, it's asking about the student. Okay, so again, get them involved in the process. All right, I know they're seniors, it's busy, their schedules, they got a lot of things going on, but it's very important that we get student involved in the process. Oops, jumping up. Okay. Now, the FAFSA really isn't this simple, but if we're going to break it down to what it's asking, this kind of does it in a summarized way. After you enter, the student enters their ID to get in, first questions are about them, demographic information, all right? Those get entered to continue the process. Step 2 is where they are allowed to enter whatever schools they're considering. It initially allows for up to 10 schools to be listed. So if you're sitting down in the middle of October and they've got a list of 8 schools, no problem. You can list those. If they got a list of more than 10, try to rank them first. You can always add different schools later. All right. Step 3 is where it's determined whether the student is a dependent student and has to list parent data, or if they're independent. Most kids coming out of high school are dependent unless they have a unique situation. Perhaps they have a legal guardian other than the parent. Perhaps the student themselves has a child that they're supporting. Perhaps they're an orphan or ward of the court. All right? In some cases, the student might go and do military service first before going to college. Those are the kinds of things that make a student independent and not need their parent information on a FAFSA. Step 4 is where the parent demographic information comes in. All right? And they need to make sure that Social Security number and date of birth are entered in there, because the FAFSA does matches against other federal databases, and one of those is Social Security Administration. Step 5 is where we ask for the financial information. And it'll ask the student if they filed taxes and to indicate that information. Then it'll ask the parent, and it'll ask for the student assets. And by assets, the FAFSA means any cash, savings, or checking accounts. All right? And if the family owns a business, what the business value is. Step 6 is where you put in the FSA IDs to sign it and click submit, and then you get a confirmation page back. And that confirms that you've completed the process. All right. When doing the FAFSA, and you're going to enter income information, they've made this a little bit easier so that it's accurate. You can, in your FAFSA, it'll ask you if you want to go into the IRS and get the data from there to put onto your FAFSA form. And we'll encourage you to do that, because it saves errors and it makes it more accurate. Many times when you do the financial aid process, the schools have to follow up with information that might be questioned. And if you've done the data retrieval from the IRS to your FAFSA, we don't have to ask for any tax return information. So it's encouraged to make sure you get that in there. Now, what year's income are you going to use on the FAFSA? And this has just changed for this coming year. Okay, so the reason they allow you to now do it in October, because it used to be January, is they're taking what they call prior year income. So when the student who is going to be a freshman in the fall of 2017 does their FAFSA, them and their parents are going to list their income in 2015. So the tax return has already been completed by now in most cases, unless you've got an extension from the IRS. So sometime in October or later when you go in, you'll be able to do that IRS data match, because it's asking you on your 2015 income. Again, this is the first year they're doing this. For kids that are freshmen right now, they also use 2015 income. But next year, on next year's FAFSA, they're going to use 2015 again. So when your student is going to be a freshman in the fall of 17, becomes a sophomore in the fall of 18, then you would use 2016 income. Again, this is the new step of the government to make sure that there are less errors, less confusion, and less estimates. The idea is that you get a better answer from the schools of what the actual cost is at an earlier date. All right. After doing the FAFSA, you're going to need to do the New York State TAP application. TAP is also using that prior year income information. All right? And there's 2 ways to do the TAP application. This is for going to college in New York State. If you're considering only out-of-state schools, you don't need to do the TAP. New York State grant money doesn't travel out of state. But the TAP application can only be done after the FAFSA is completed. The first way to do it is after you click submit on the FAFSA and you get your confirmation page. On the third paragraph, there's a link that says if you're a New York State resident, you can click here and do your TAP application now. If you miss that, it's not the end of the world, because after your FAFSA gets processed, which usually takes only about 3 days if you've done the FSA IDs on it, then New York State sends you an email, because you listed your emails on the FAFSA, and says, hey, you can do your TAP application now. And the student can go in, create it, and TAP. Only the student needs a username and password. TAP also carries over a lot of the federal information onto the form, so that you don't have to re-put in a lot of the demographic information. TAP only lists one school initially. It's usually the first New York school that you listed on your FAFSA. You can go in and make TAP changes, school code changes at any time. Main thing is once you've selected a school, making sure that your TAP school matches up with the school you chose. TAP is for any New York State school, whether it be public or private. All right, TAP does have limits, and I don't think it was on my other slide, but the maximum TAP amount is around $5,000. Okay, again, lower the New York State income, the closer you can get to that amount. So TAP only lists one school. Once the application is complete, you can go back into the TAP website and make school code changes. You can always change it to a different New York school. You could go in as many times as you need to if that school keeps changing for you. But if you're going outside of New York State, TAP is only for New York State residents in New York State schools, so nothing will happen with that TAP or where that you left if you go to a college out of state.
Are you allowed to change after May?
You're allowed to change after May. You're allowed to change even into the school year. So let's say it becomes August and you make a last minute change. That's fine.
Does the reward change based on school?
Yep. TAP can change a little bit based on the award. It's based on income, but there's also a factor on the cost of tuition of the school. Okay, and where that comes in is if that cost of the school is lower than $5,000 for tuition, your TAP award can't be more than the tuition. But pretty much it's the same because most schools' tuitions are over that right now. All right, this is what the TAP website looks like when you get to it. And you can see in that middle paragraph, first create the username and PIN for and it's the student that gets one. Okay, so just kind of as a recap, the FSA ID can be done at any time. Scholarship searches can be ongoing at any time as well. FAFSA after October 1st, but again, there's no advantage of sitting down October 1st versus December 1st in most cases. TAP can't be after the FAFSA and possibly not until January 1st, depending on what New York State does. And some schools might have other forms that they require you to fill out. All right? And regarding that, check with the school. Sometimes certain schools have a separate information form they want you to do. If you were considering early decision at a college, they usually have a separate form they want you to fill out regarding financial aid. If you're considering some very competitive private schools, a lot of them require an additional form called a profile form. How do you know if these private schools require it? You can check with them or go to the profile website. That lists all the colleges in the country that require the form. Examples, University of Rochester, Colgate, Cornell. Okay, they're the very highly competitive schools. And the reason they do this profile form is when they're giving their institutional money away, their own scholarship dollars, they want to be as discerning as possible in doing so. The profile form is a little more complicated than the FAFSA. They ask a little bit more questions. They ask questions about your home value, more assets than the FAFSA does. All right. They also, if the parents are separated or divorced, they will ask questions on both parents, where the FAFSA, if there's a separation divorce, is looking at the family the child lives with. So there are some differences, but very few schools use it. But those that do, make sure if you're considering them, you get to that and do that process. That starts after October 1st as well. All right, A college I mentioned might require an additional scholarship applications. And then if you're considering schools in New York and you're considered disadvantaged and need access to the school that you might not normally achieve, public colleges have what they call an EOP, or Educational Opportunity Program, and private schools have a Higher Educational Opportunity Program. These are New York State schools only that have an additional requirement to help certain students who might not otherwise meet the general admissions requirement of the school. Okay, sometimes there's delays in the financial aid processing. And the biggest one we experience, and we see it all the time, is the FSA ID. All right, they forgot the email they used when they set it up, or they used the parent's email for the student and then they created a Gmail account and they can't remember it. Things like that. All right. Sometimes the citizenship question on the FAFSA gets answered incorrectly. If someone's a permanent resident, it even asks for that and their alien registration number. All right, but if it's answered or skipped because you're like, of course I'm a U.S. citizen, it will cause delays because it doesn't match with the immigration services. And for males, have to register with Selective Service between the ages of 18 and 25. If they're not registered when they do the FAFSA, it comes back to the financial aid office as flagged, and then we've got to request that the student register. There is a question on the FAFSA that says, register me for Selective Service. And we encourage the males to do that so that they can get the federal benefits by registering. If they're 17 when they do the FAFSA, and you check that, the minute they turn 18, it registers them. All right, it's easy way to get the registration for Selective Service done. All right, or they can go to the Selective Service website and do it as well. All right, and then missing signatures. So, all right, sometimes we get the FAFSA done, the student completes it, and the parent never puts their FSA ID in, or vice versa. Parent did it for them, and the student's FSA ID is missing. All those things cause rejects or delays in the process. Okay, once you get through the application process, how do you know you did it? How did things get processed? All right, when you did the FAFSA, it asked for a student email address and a parent email address. FAFSA sends you an email saying, we've now processed your information. All right, to the parent, they just say, a FAFSA has been processed for your son or daughter. But the student can actually go in and get the record, which will have that EFC, or expected family contribution, on it. A certain number of FAFSAs that get processed each year get selected for verification. And what that means is the schools would then say, we need a little bit of additional information from you. We need to confirm your family size or the number in college that you put in the FAFSA. Or if you've done the IRS data retrieval, we don't have to ask for income information, but if you didn't do it, we sometimes have to ask for tax return data. So again, that's why we encourage you to do it, because probably about 30% of all FAFSAs are required to be verified by the schools. Once you've done the FAFSA and made sure you've done your signatures on it, the FSA IDs, usually 3-day turnaround with the results. Now, since this is an earlier time frame from schools to get it from you, because in the past we said file after January 1st, the school might not follow up with you immediately in October, all right? At our school, we're creating a system so that we at least send an email out to the emails that were on the FAFSA saying, hey, we've received your FAFSA for the 2017-18 year. We haven't started processing yet, but when we do, we'll let you know. Just to let you relax that we've got the information. And I think most schools are doing a similar tact. So you probably will hear something, but in October or November, you might not get an award letter, or you might not get a follow-up for additional information. But you might get something saying, hey, we've got your data. We'll notify you when we're ready to move to the next step. All right. Eventually, when we've got your data and any follow-up that we might have asked for, that's when we begin the financial aid awarding process. And we package your financial aid based on our policies for our own institutional dollars. Your federal and state awards are determined based on the results of your FAFSA and TAP application. And then we also send what your federal loan eligibility is for the year, and whether it's subsidized, unsubsidized, or what the combination is, and if there's any work-study awards that we're offering. All right. Once you can do the TAP application, those notifications come from New York State. All right, and then the award letters. In prior years, all the award letters got mailed in March or April. Now they're going to probably start happening earlier. And every school might have a different time frame. So if you're still in the process of talking to the colleges you're applying to, you may want to ask them, when do you think you're going to start doing your award letters this year? Because believe me, it's kind of all over the map right now. We're still not sure when we're going to start doing them. Some schools are going to jump early and might start to do them in December. Some might wait till January, February, March. We're still not sure in terms of the process. But again, just so you know, when you're comparing schools, it's a good question to ask them through your process or if you're on a tour, is when do you think you're going to start doing award letters with this new early financial aid process? This is difficult to see, and I'm going to break it down in the next couple slides, but this is what a typical award letter looks like. Okay, so the school will have their letterhead on it, and they'll have information in a couple different sections. One will include their costs. One will include any grants or scholarships you received. And it'll give you an idea what your net cost is after that. And then it'll give you options on how to pay for that net cost in loans and other ways. So the first section would be your estimated costs. All right, this is just an example and how it's breaking down. All right, direct costs are those things that you would pay the school for directly or that financial aid would pay for directly. Usually includes tuition, fees, and room and board if living on campus. All right, and a meal plan. Indirect costs include the price of books, which can vary from school to school. Transportation expenses. If you're going to live at the college, that's the cost of getting back and forth there 3 or 4 times a year. If you're living at home and commuting to college, that transportation cost is higher because the room cost is lower because they're living at home. All right, and other educational expenses. All right, what is a student going to need money for while they're at school? All right, whether that includes meals when the dining halls aren't open, laundry money, entertainment expenses, things like that. And those estimated other educational costs, those are costs they would have whether they went to college or not, right? Their cell phone bill, those kinds of things. All right, then there will be a section on grants and scholarships. All right, and again, this is just a sample. It'll be different for every family. All right, and it might include TAP, it might include Pell, it might include some institutional scholarships. And at the very bottom will be a section that says, here's your net cost for both direct and indirect after your grants and scholarships, the good type of aid was applied. All right, so how can you pay for the additional aid? And again, a sample might be student loans offered. It might talk about parent loan eligibility. It might have work study. All right, but just to give you some options to help break that down for you as you've gone through the process. All right, just a couple different strategies to look at as you're going through it. Obviously, keeping things organized. All right, remember your FSA ID. Remember your TAP, user ID, and PIN. Those types of things that you're going to have to sign into multiple times. All right, the FAFSA has to be done each school year when the student's in school. The first time you go through it, it's going to be their awards for their freshman year. Because it's based on income, that could change year 2 if your income changes. All right, so you got to be prepared to do it every year. All right, meet the school's deadlines. With this earlier FAFSA, it's easier to meet those deadlines. It used to be you couldn't file to January 1st, and competitive schools said, we want your FAFSA done by February 1st. And you're like, my taxes aren't even done, and then you got to estimate them, and it was a mess. Now with the prior year, we get rid of that mess, but again, still don't put it off. Make sure you get it done in a timely fashion. All right? Email is the preferred method of communication for most schools and from the FAFSA and TAP agencies. What happens a lot is you'll do the FAFSA, the parent will get the email, student will get the email, student gets the school information goes through, and the school starts emailing the student. And the student's not talking to their parent much and saying, gee, I got this email about financial aid, they want info. Parent will call us and say, hey, why don't we have a financial aid award yet? Well, you're missing info. I didn't know. Well, we've been communicating with the student. So realize the schools do a lot of their communication directly to the student, and they've got to be responsible to make sure they're sharing that with you to make sure the financial aid process gets done. When you call schools, they will say, gee, we need to talk to the student, unless the student's done what's called a FERPA form. Because once the student's in college, the record's considered theirs, and they have to sign off giving the school the right to talk to the parent, even in the financial aid office, and it has all your income on it. So I know at a couple schools, ours included, when orientation comes around, they tell the students, hey, do you want to answer questions on your bill, or do you want mom and dad to do it? They're like, mom and dad. They're like, okay, sign this form to give us the right to talk to them. So make sure that process happens as well, because we get a lot of cases where we've talked to the student, hasn't been shared with the parent, and then there's confusion. All right, and then, make charts. Do something as you're comparing schools, if you're looking at several different schools, so you can look at their total cost, the net cost, and things that help you make decisions on what you have to pay and to make a final decision on a school. Whoops. If you have questions, general questions as a result of the evening or as when you get through the process, even if you're not considering MCC as a school, I offer my email address or phone number at work to give me a call, because from a financial aid community, myself and the directors at other schools, the more information we can give you to make your process easier, it only helps us on the back end for our jobs to make it easier. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them. There are no dumb questions related to financial aid, and we really mean that. We want to help you get through that process to help you make better decisions. And again, thank you all for coming, and plenty of time for the football game.